Hello everybody, my name is Regan and welcome back to PressPlay Studios. I'm alone again today because we'll be discussing the Rule of Two, part 2 of this series, the finale of this series, that we'll be looking at the Sith's terms and conditions for operating. Last week we looked at how it actually worked, what was the brain behind the rule, but today we're going to be looking at who made the rule work. Why was it so effective? It was partially because it was the people who use it. They were selfless and able to devote themselves to the Sith and not try and gain power through some desperate struggle halfway through when their plan was formulated. Although, granted, some decided to try and not make it work. I'm not looking at anyone in particular, but yeah. Please note, same with last video, that most of this information is legends. Canon hasn't really explained all of the Sith that we do see, although I will be sure to put a C in the bottom of the screen to any Sith who are canon. Okay, let's get this started with the man himself, Darth Bane, the founder of the Rule of Two, and also suffering from the Peter Parker complex. Okay, bad jokes aside, Bane was born around 1026 years before the Battle of Yavin, which is the main date that we use when we're trying to talk about Star Wars, is Episode 4's Battle of Yavin. He was raised by a miner on his homeworld of Apatros, before killing his father and attracting the attention of the Sith, because if you want to become a Sith Lord, murder is usually the best way to do it. Now, as we learned last episode, Bane was the founder of the Rule of Two, and the Rule of Two is important because it needs an apprentice to crave the power, which is where canon and legend splits off from this type of thinking, as we don't have any official name for Darth Bane's apprentice in canon, but we do have it in legends, so that's where we're going to be going for the next Sith, named Darth Zana. Zana was originally a young Jedi around 1,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, who actually fought the Sith, but she got separated and was forced to survive on a hostile planet all by herself. I mean, she did make a friend, but they ended up getting killed by the Jedi, before Zana herself got revenge and killed the Jedi. This action attracted the attention of Darth Bane, who took her as his first apprentice. Notice I said first, because the man who wrote all the rules regarding the Rule of Two broke them within 30 years. After a few decades of training, Bane got scared that Zana had found a flaw in his thinking. That was simply wait till your master gets too old to defend himself and off him easily. Sure, a 90-year-old Sith Lord may still be a force to be reckoned with, but they're definitely a lot less of a force to be reckoned with if you have a 30-year-old who has been trained all her life in the Force. They've got the athletic and probably the youthful advantage. This forced Bane to take on a second apprentice, which broke the Rule of Two, as if you have an apprentice you cannot take another one. Nicknamed the Huntress for her bounty hunting skills. Zana realized that Bane wasn't particularly happy with it and actually challenged her master to the fight that Bane had been waiting for and managed to win. Zana then took on the Huntress as one last big middle finger to Darth Bane, where she renamed herself Darth Cognos. It's unknown exactly when or how Zana was killed, but we do know that she did eventually die as Darth Cognos became the Sith Master, and she took on her own apprentice called Darth Millennial. However, the ability not to break into the property market was the least of his concerns, as Cognos wanted him dead for blasphemy against the Rule of Two. Luckily, at least for Millennial, he was able to escape and become a cult leader, which, come to think of it, is probably not the best career path, but I guess if you're a Sith, you don't really have that many good references. We don't know how Cognos died or who her apprentice was, but we do know that the lineage continued, otherwise this video wouldn't be a thing. So let's go on to the next named Sith that we know about. Darth Vectivus is the next Sith in our lineage. Information on his Sithiness is quite scarce to find. We know that he was a successful businessman and that he started to do some scientific research on the dark side, which started a bit of a trend with the Sith as they started to look more at the science rather than the spiritual side during this era. What makes Vectivus so intriguing as a character is the fact that he wasn't consumed by the dark side like many Sith were. He was actually able to die at home, surrounded by friends and family, but it also means that his apprentice, who we don't know who it was, did try out the Zana technique and actually got it to work, which means Vectivus might have been a bit of a pushover. Here's our next time grab before we come to Darth Gravid. Now if you ask the Sith, they'll probably tell you that Gravid set back the Order centuries according to Plagueis and that he went insane, which implies that the rest of the Sith aren't actually insane, but that's neither here nor there. He decided to mix some Rule of Two Sith teachings with some Jedi light side teaching, and that went about as well as combining broccoli and cereal. Gravid was the most popular guy amongst the rest of the Sith, and he was killed while trying to destroy everything that the Sith had built up over the years, killed by his apprentice Darth Geen. We don't know much about her except for the fact that she killed Gravita and took her own apprentice, who once again we don't have a name for. The next Sith we see is actually just a standalone Sith called Darth Ramage, as we don't know who trained him or who he trained. But we do know this: he was an avid fan of Back to the Future. Hey, Scott! The dude was obsessed with time travel on an entirely different level of weird than just the traditional Star Wars weird. Other than that, we know very little about him. He didn't really do anything other than, time travel. So let's move on to some more interesting guys. Darth Tenebrous' master is the next Sith that we know about, and ironically, they are only known for training Darth Tenebrous, who was Darth Plagueis' master. But back to Darth Tenebrous' master, who doesn't actually have a name of her own. She was a Twi'lek Sith who was known for working on the Grand Plan, which is what the Sith ended up implementing in the end. Basically, at this point though, the Grand Plan was just a two-step process. Step 1, destroy the Jedi. Step 2, figure it out later. Now Tenebrous and his master tried to do this with a plague that would remove the Force from the Jedi, but they couldn't perfect it and ended up abandoning the project. In a separate incident, the unnamed Sith Master opened a rift, allowing the Jedi to notice the Sith's presence for the first time in 8 centuries. Of course, the Jedi didn't do anything with this information because they're the Jedi, but hey, it happened. Now you can probably guess who the next Sith Lord is. Why, it's Darth Tenebrous. What a surprise. He was arguably the biggest science nerd in the entirety of the Sith Order, as he was obsessed with destroying the Jedi by using Darkseid as an energy force rather than just as like a spiritual thing. He trained an apprentice called Darth Plagueis, but he wasn't that confident that Plagueis would amount to anything and actually trained another apprentice in the same way that Bane did. Now, while this other Sith will never actually claim the title of Sith Master, meaning that they never really were actually a Sith Lord, I feel like they deserve to be mentioned here. Darth Venomous was, as he was called, was a Bith just like Darth Tenebrous, and some even think he may have been a son or a nephew or some kind. Some sort of relation to Tenebrous. Now, before Tenebrous died in 67 BBY, he gave specific instructions to Venomous to kill Plagueis. Wow, all these S's in the end of these names. Now, Venomous did try this, but because Plagueis is wise...
You ever hear the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise?
He didn't die, rather being kept alive for humanoid experiments by Plagueis, which is probably one of the scariest things that I can actually imagine happening to me. Only being alive for painful experiments doesn't sound fun. Now we got into the more well-known lineage, and a lot of this stuff is now canon. I'll try to skim over what most of us know. Darth Plagueis trained a non-human from Naboo called Palpatine. Palpatine took the name Darth Sidious and took Darth Maul as an apprentice after he killed Plagueis in his sleep in 32 BBY, which is the same time that Phantom Menace took place. Actually, Sidious killed Plagueis during the events of the Phantom Menace. Towards the end of the movie is around the time that the murder happened. We just didn't see it on screen, which is kind of disappointing. Maul had already been training under Sidious by this time, but he was used mostly as a weapon, and Plagueis allowed it as long as Maul wasn't actually trained as a true Sith. Maul would be presumed dead after being cut in half by Obi-Wan Kenobi on Naboo, but he actually survived until the Clone Wars, where we saw him again, and longer after that until he was finally finished off by Obi-Wan during the Rebels era. Now, during the Clone Wars, he tried to actually go back to Palpatine, but because he had already started training his brother, Savage Opress, in the ways of the dark side, Palpatine rejected him, calling him a rival. Now, this was for good reason, because now there was a separate master and apprentice, meaning they didn't know who was the true rule of two at that point. So Palpatine didn't kill Maul and Savage because he loved it. It was more because he loved the lineage. Or he's a sick psychopathic murderous grandpa. Then we move on to Count Dooku, who was usurped by Darth Vader, formerly known as Anakin Skywalker. Vader would take a few apprentices of his own, but they were never technically Sith, so they don't quite count here. Around 30 years later, Vader threw Palpatine off the edge of the Death Star and presumably to his death. Of course, Episode 9 has revealed that that may not be the case, but we just don't know what's going to happen there. There were a few more Sith after Palpatine, but they weren't really true Sith, at least not in the rule of two lineage, so the lineage could technically be said to have ended there with Palpatine's death. I mean, and a lot of this is Legends material. He did actually die there in Legends. He came back as a clone a couple of times, but that was a very messy situation. But because these guys were technically Sith and they're on the Wikipedia page, I feel like I should actually mention them here. Lumaya was a former Emperor's hand, Vajir, who turned to the dark side around a decade before the Clone Wars and resurfaced as a major player in the Yuuzhan Vong War, Karnal Jax, who made a desperate attempt for the Imperial throne following Palpatine's defeat and was trained by Lumaya. Another man trained by Lumaya was Slint, who turned to the light side but ended up dead as a result. Darth Kaidos, who was essentially a better Kylo Ren, Tahiri Vila, who would become Kaidos' apprentice during the Second Galactic Civil War, and finally Darth Vader, who some 139 years after the Battle of Yavin was killed. Now these last few Sith are quite contentious about whether they're actually in the lineage, but I feel like I should just mention him just in case some of you guys think that they should be. Which is actually what I want you guys to comment down below. Who was your favourite Sith that you have seen on this list? Was it Bane? Was it Plagueis? Was it even Flint, who died because he turned to the light side? Was it even Lemire, who actually trains a couple of people afterwards? Make sure to like and subscribe, and actually add your comments down below. And with that, guys, that's a wrap.